Hey guys, it's Celestia. Actually, you know what? It isn't. Because Celestia is a blue-haired anime girl sprite on your screen, and she doesn't exist. I'm Paige, and you have no idea who I am. And I'm here today to tell you why that's a good thing and a bad thing. But first, let's take a quick moment to talk about today's sponsor, because I have fallen in love. Yes, obviously with my wife, but now also with these 4 ridiculously beautiful men, who she knows about, don't worry, because Tears of Themis has ruined my life, and I would have it no other way. I'll get into the basis of the game itself in a second, but please just look at them. Look at their cards for the new Dreams of Childhood event and tell me that you don't understand why they own my heart now. I'll wait. While I wait, let me explain the game. Tears of Themis is a game made by Hoyoverse, the makers of Genshin Impact, which is abundantly clear right off the bat because the art, music, and UI are just as strikingly gorgeous. And not only do you have the opportunity to romance these 4 beautiful boys, you also get to investigate a series of genuinely interesting and engaging mysteries in the process, and from the perspective of a girl boss attorney, no less. And with their event, Dreams of Childhood, players can dive even deeper into those mysteries firsthand by investigating crime scenes, analyzing evidence, and fighting to find the answers that they're seeking in Stellis, a city where things are much more complicated and devious than they seem. It's a game I can't put down, as evidenced by my screen time and conversations with my wife, and I highly recommend that you check it out and participate in this event via the link in the description, because I wouldn't spend my 1 full hour of free time a day on this game if it wasn't this good. Anyway, onto the actual topic. As I said before, you don't know me. You don't know my favorite color. You don't know my birthday, probably. You don't know what kind of music I like. You don't know what's important to me. You don't know what makes me laugh or smile. You don't know what makes me sad. But based on my channel and my, as of writing this, 77 videos, I'm sure you feel like you do know me a little bit. And in all honesty, you probably do. I want you to. I want you to know as much of me as I'm willing to put out there, but I don't want you to know more than that. That said, your perception of who I am as a person is exclusively limited to what I choose to display, which isn't in and of itself a bad thing, because again, that's the amount of myself that I want to be known. The problem begins to arise if you start defining who I really am by that limited perception, because for a multitude of reasons that I'm going to get into today, defining creators by their online personas, as if those personas are the entirety of their actual identities, sets everyone up for failure. So that in mind, let's start with an example. What's the difference between Duchess Celestia and Paige, the person who writes her? First off, Celestia is censored. Celestia has to abide by YouTube's guidelines and would say the F word much more if she could. As Paige, I would vastly prefer to discuss these topics with much more candor than I'm able to. Celestia is also trying to present a relatively professional and objective perspective, while Paige would be more inclined to do so alongside a more personal, individualistically focused viewpoint. Paige has a lot of opinions. She'd like to share them. Celestia, though, needs to be politically correct with a carefully curated vocabulary and use of terminology. But Paige would be far less formal and far more off-the-cuff and authentic in terms of verbiage and manner of speaking. Celestia aims to bring her audience the clearest interpretation of facts as she can. Paige wants to talk to her audience as if they're just like her, which they are, without the barrier of, should I say it this way, the way that I feel I want to communicate it, or should I censor or revise it to make sure it can't be misconstrued? Celestia wants to be informative. Paige wants to be real. And quite frankly, they can't coexist. On the Duchess Celestia channel, my goal as Celestia is to offer fellow artists as much objectivity and professionalism as possible while covering serious topics, fun topics, and everything in between. I also want it to be appropriate for 13+ age groups, despite the fact that my preferred vernacular is far more crass than that would allow for. I want to be objective, relatively family-friendly, marketable, and accessible, while also being realistic and authentic. But for me to be all of those primary things, I have to some degree, sacrifice my ability to be the most realistic and authentic version of myself that I would like to be, leaving those as secondary priorities. And it's not because I want to hide who I really am from you, it's because presenting content in a professional manner means that I have to some extent. But from my perspective, that means saying, my audience will only ever know this small portion of my true self that is carefully curated for them. For the audience, it often comes across as, what she's portraying in her content is exactly who she is and is a full summation of it. And I want to talk more today about how that mentality hurts everyone involved. That's right, we're talking about parasocial relationships. Specifically, how I've gone from experiencing them as a fan to experiencing them as a creator, the differences between the two, and what I've learned about both perspectives since finding some degree of minuscule success on YouTube. It's really changed the way that I look at them, despite the fact that I did consider myself to have a relatively woke perspective on them in the first place, not to sound too much like your grandpa who looked at Twitter for 43 seconds and decided to adopt the Gen Z vocabulary. But first and foremost, let's define parasocial relationships. Wikipedia says they're relationships in which a viewer or listener comes to consider a media personality as a friend, despite having no or limited interactions with them. Dr. Sally Theron from Wellesley College defines them as imaginary, one-sided relationships that individuals form with public figures whom they do not know personally. The bottom line in almost all definitions is, effectively, that parasocial relationships occur when someone who has no, or almost no, interaction with a public figure of any sort still feels that they know them personally to some degree. Most of these definitions make them sound like stalkers. Like these are people who have, to some genuinely delusional extent, come to believe themselves to have personal relationships with people they've never met, simply because they think they know and love them. But that's really just the most extreme possibility. In reality, it's a spectrum. I'm not saying the extremes don't exist, of course. I mean, look at K-pop or J-pop idol fans, because they're a perfect example of the delusional extreme that one might envision when they hear the word parasocial relationships. If you're not familiar with that particular subculture, these people are fans of idols, which in primarily Japan and Korea are celebrities and entertainers that are marketed primarily for their looks, talents, and personalities. They're often singers, dancers, actors, models, and more, but their fans don't just love them for their work. It's not at all uncommon for superfans to get so obsessed with them that they stalk them, follow everything they do, try to pry into every corner of their lives, and do so with a much more personal agenda than we see normally in Western circles. These people aren't paparazzi invading celebrities' personal lives for the sake of financial gain. These are people who feel such a deep personal connection to these idols they've never met that they want that degree of closeness just because they feel they care about them so much that they're entitled to invade their privacy. Of course, they're not all like that. In fact, those kinds of superfans are generally looked down upon by other more level-headed groups of fans who believe in respecting their idols' boundaries and loving them from afar. But even within those groups, there's often still a general feeling of, we love this idol on a deep emotional level, more than just, we love this idol's music, or whatever else they create. It's such a pervasive problem that idols everywhere are forced to hide their relationships at all costs to preserve their careers. Because without those fans who feel like they might have a chance of being with them romantically, they could lose everything they have. Even if those fans don't actually believe that they could realistically have a chance at dating them, their enjoyment of them as idols is frequently, in large part, based on the illusion of them being romantically available to them or anyone else remaining intact. Not to be that guy, but it's actually an issue that Tears of Themis tackles in one of their narratives, which speaks to how much more I've played of this game than I intended to, but whatever. They handle it really well and bring light to it in a way that criticizes people expecting deep personal relationships from idols, and humanizes the idols themselves and the issues that they deal with as a result, and I really respect it. Anyway, point being, there are a lot of parasocial relationships like that, where the person in question just delusionally believes themselves to be connected to whoever they're idolizing because they want to be. And that's often what comes to mind when you consider a parasocial relationship, simply because of how sensationalized it is. But in reality, it's vastly more complicated than that. It's easy to look at that example and see exactly what's wrong and unhealthy about it, but that is not always the case. There are also perfectly reasonable and self-aware people who will look at creators and think, I really relate to how they feel about this, or I've gone through a similar experience, or I identify with this aspect of their content or personality, and so on. And subsequently, they begin to relate to them more deeply and intrinsically than they intended to. These are people who are not delusional or unreasonable by nature. They're just looking at what these creators are presenting as being examples of life experiences or personality traits that they can relate to. And subsequently, they end up feeling like they can understand the creator based on the things that they have in common. And these, just like those of the more extreme idol fans, are parasocial relationships too, even if it's much harder to look at them and point out what's unhealthy or wrong about it. More often than not, these relationships start out incredibly innocuously and harmlessly. Most people aren't even aware of it. They just feel a connection to a creator they like based on some things that they share or agree on. And if it never gets any deeper or more obsessive than that, it could easily stay on that level without causing anyone any harm. If a fan feels like they can connect with a creator based on things they perceive them having in common, and and all that feeling does is amplify how much they enjoy their content, that's fine. It's not hurting anyone, it's not crossing the creator's boundaries, and it's not causing any harm to that fan's mental health. But the issues begin to arise when it does start becoming more severe, which can happen quite easily and quickly. If you start identifying with a creator and you watch more and more of their content, the idea that you have of who they are and the things they stand for becomes more and more ingrained in your mind. And if you don't keep an eye on it and make a strong effort to be as self-aware as possible, it can turn into less of a, here's how I'm interpreting these traits of this creator, and more of a, I relate to this creator, so they probably agree with this opinion of mine, or share this view of mine, or feel the way I feel about this, and so on. It's why people have such a problem with canceling creators over nothing. First, they looked up to them, then they identified with them, and then they idolized them and put them on a pedestal on which they could do no wrong, based on nothing more than their flawed perception of them. And then the creator did something they didn't like, and it didn't match those unreasonable expectations of them that they unintentionally developed. And usually it's just a human mistake that anyone could make. Often even a mistake that the fan themselves would be likely to make or has already made. But the gradual development of a parasocial relationship has turned their view of this creator into something distinctly not human. Humans aren't perfect, but the parasocial perceptions of idolized creators are perfect, which is an impossible standard for them to meet, and it sets up everyone involved for failure. For example, say you start watching a creator's content because of their content alone. You like their work, so you like them. As time goes on though, you start relating to that creator because they're passionate about a topic you love, or they've been through something that you've also been through, or you share what you've seen of their values, or you find their personality charming or relatable, or a combination of all of that. Subsequently, without you necessarily even noticing the shift, you start enjoying their content less because of what that content actually is, and more because it's them making it. And that's honestly all normal. That's a normal part of enjoying any kind of content in which the creator's personality is clear and primarily highlighted in the delivery of that content. That's not a bad thing so long as you realize it and consciously remind yourself that you don't actually know this person, and they're just some random dumbass out there talking to their computer, just as flawed and human as you. But for the sake of this example, let's say you don't do that. You start relating more and more to this creator without any self-awareness or restraint. And because creators only show a portion of who they really are online, it's incredibly easy to start using what they don't show as a blank slate. You don't know how they feel about something because they don't show it or talk about it? Well, you have so much in common with them as it is, so it's easy to assume they feel the same way you do about it. You don't know what they do behind the scenes, but you're sure they wouldn't do anything you wouldn't do. And those flawed but initially tempting assumptions gradually combine into a skewed view of this creator, almost as if the information they gave you about themselves as people through their content was a Mad Lib's word puzzle, and you just filled in all of the blanks with the most appealing answers. And then they break the illusion. They do something behind the scenes that your idealized version of them would never do. Sometimes it's something that they themselves claimed they would never do or acted as if they would never do. And that does put more blame on the creator, which I'll get into more later. But more often than not, it's just that you, as a fan, assumed they would never do something like that, despite them giving no indication one way or the other. And now this thing, no matter how trivial it may be, seems to you like it should warrant the end of their career, and in many cases, it has nothing to do with how bad the thing they did actually was. Instead, it has everything to do with the fact that you feel betrayed. They broke the illusion that you had created of who they were, and it hurts, because you were so sure that you knew them. You simultaneously raised them up to be an idol and cared for and related to them as a friend, despite not knowing them personally at all. So it doesn't feel like some random stranger did something you don't like. It feels like someone you trusted and cared about betrayed that trust. Which is precisely why it's so easy to ruin a creator's career and cancel them over nothing. Because more often than not, whatever they did is something that you wouldn't bat an eye at a stranger doing. You might think, okay, that's kind of a scummy thing to do, but whatever, and move on. But despite these creators still being nothing more than those strangers to you, you feel closer to them than that. So you're judging their action as if it were done to you by a friend or loved one or role model, which will inevitably make that action seem much more malicious and harmful and hurtful than it reasonably should have been. You're judging them more harshly than you otherwise would or should for making an honest mistake, because the person that you thought they were wouldn't have made it. In your eyes, not only have they hurt you with whatever they did, they deceived you by making you believe they wouldn't have done it. That's just one possible scenario, of course. Like I said, there are also cases where the creator in question isn't just an innocent victim. Let's go back to that Mad Libs analogy. In the example I just used, the creator in question left all of those spaces in their personality, life, and identity blank to preserve their privacy and their work-life balance. The fan is the one that filled in those spaces with what they either saw in them or wanted to see in them. And the fan, in that case, is to blame for the misconception. But there are other creators who fill out those spaces themselves with traits that they don't possess, either intentionally or unintentionally leading fans to develop parasocial relationships with versions of themselves that don't exist. Look at Creepshow art. I know this has been talked to death, but the example stands. She painted herself as a picture of virtue and morality, as someone who was always so well-intentioned and ethically sound that her constant judgments should have been taken as gospel, and as someone who would fight tooth and nail not only for those she loved, but for all of those that were oppressed and without the voice they needed to fight back against that oppression. If she had left that grandstanding out and just allowed the part of herself she didn't want to show through her content to be blanks, she still would have faced just as much backlash for the harassment and stalking. But the things she said on LolCow alone might not have been the end of her career. Instead, she filled those blanks with, "I'm an ally and a pillar of morality." So when she was found out to have been spewing transphobic slurs, body shaming, and more, it hurt people more, because she deliberately led them to believe that that was something she would never do. It wasn't something fans didn't know if she would do, it was something they trusted she would never do. And in that case, fans are not the only ones to blame for the skewed perceptions they develop of creators, because those creators are actively trying to skew those perceptions. In my opinion, creators have a bigger responsibility to handle parasocial relationships healthily than people talk about, honestly. I don't mean they should be blamed for their audiences forming them, but I do think they should do their absolute best to try to stop it from happening, or at least refrain from enabling it. It's such a difficult situation for reasons I'll get into more later, and I understand that there often feels like no right answer, which is why I'm absolutely not trying to fault creators that are just doing their best to figure out how to tackle it. I am trying to criticize creators who either plant the seeds for deliberately false and inaccurate parasocial relationships in order to further their careers and make themselves look better, as I just went over, as well as those who welcome and encourage parasocial relationships in order to exploit their viewers. I mean the people who are out here constantly telling their viewers that they love them all and actively inviting a false sense of intimacy between them. Like, I love you guys, sure, but I don't love any of you personally, nor do I even know you. I love the community that's formed around this stupid little channel, and I love being a part of it, and I love seeing your kindness and creativity whenever I open Discord or look in my hashtag. And I'm not talking about creators that make that differentiation and mean it that way, because I think that's pretty normal. I mean the creators who look at fans saying, "I love you so much, you are the light of my life and my favorite person in the world," and responding not with, "Thank you for your support," but rather, "Oh, I love you so much too." For some, I'm sure this is completely well-intentioned, but I can say with confidence that for others, it's a way to exploit the love these fans have for them to make more money off of them. There are so many documented instances of creators doing this to deliberately encourage donations well into the thousands, from fans that are clearly in love with them parasocially, by basically implying, "If you send me enough money and give me enough gifts and attention, maybe you have a chance with me." And I understand that this isn't always the case, and maybe I'm being too hard on these people, but it's genuinely kind of scary to watch creators in these situations, because like, these are people who are delusionally devoted to them and believe they know them personally to the point that they will drain their savings into that creator's bank account just to get them to acknowledge them. And instead of encouraging them to seek help for their mental health, they're enabling them because it's profitable. Parasocial relationships often lead fans to want to be a bigger part of their creator's life, to stand out from the rest of their audience, to help them and be helped by them, and so on. And all of that is dangerously easy to abuse. I don't know. It's complicated, and there are two sides to every coin, and everyone's gotta pay rent somehow, but it just strikes me personally as irresponsible and negligent. That's just my opinion though, and I'd be really interested to hear all of your thoughts on it in the comments, because I feel like this specifically is something that there will be a lot of differing stances on. And after all that, we still haven't touched on the technical aspect. All of this so far has been largely related to the emotional impact parasocial relationships have on fans. But what about the even more measurable impact they have on the spread of misinformation? Consider just how dangerous it can be to let parasocial relationships with creators impact how much credibility you give them, especially if their content is based in commentary. Feeling like you know and trust a creator often leads to you giving them the benefit of the doubt without fact-checking what they're saying. You know, they've been reliable in the past, and you relate to them and identify with them, so you don't need to double-check or research what they're saying anymore. And now Now suddenly you're taking their word for information that may not be true, or adopting their opinions as your own without taking the time to form your own first. If everyone simply accepts the statements made by their favorite creators as factual or morally correct simply because they came from them, not only will misinformation inevitably be spread at an alarming rate, but it'll result in, well, exactly what we already see on Twitter. Reactionary, impulsive fighting rather than productive debate or conversation, making everything into a personal battle rather than a mature disagreement, and people having their lives destroyed by unsubstantiated hearsay. But all of this still, for the most part, is stuff I was aware of before starting out on YouTube. It was stuff I was prepared for, especially after Creepshow Art gave me such a wake-up call in terms of being more conscious of how much trust and personal connection I was attributing to creators I looked up to. Now I just assume everyone's an asshole, which serves me much better. But there's so much more to it on the creator side of things that I never could have anticipated. So let's get into that next. Before starting my channel, or at least before my channel started growing, I had generously assumed that the more extreme examples of parasocial relationships were few and far between, and mostly just sensationalized and over-dramatized. I thought, for the most part, that most people dealing with them were just like me. They were people that were looking up to creators they really liked, and struggling to remind themselves sometimes that they're just humans, just like us. Like the pure, naive buffoon I was, I really thought that was gonna be it. And if anyone ever ended up watching my shit at all, that was the worst example of it that I would face. I was wrong, as is a recurring theme in my life. Over the past year, I had a stalker who harassed me across all of my social media, including my personal Facebook account and work email, and harassed my wife all across all of hers, because he found out that I was a married lesbian and desperately wanted to know if I still liked boys, as if my being bisexual would make me any less married or otherwise unavailable to him. I still get emails from him. I then had the opposite extreme in the form of a whole 4chan thread of people reducing me to, she thinks Legon is bad, she's a piece of human garbage, and spewing such horrible things that if I wasn't completely dead inside, probably would have made me feel pretty darn bad. Because to them, I was literally just that opinion. I, as a person, was just that one video of mine that they watched. Then I had someone send me a video they made in which they said that they watched my story times and felt bad about what I'd gone through, but that they resonated very deeply with me and who I was. And to summarize, basically, if I accepted the love of Christ into my life, I would be healed and have no more problems. Whole video of that, sent and addressed to me by full real name. I've had people get genuinely angry with me for not thanking them for their support enough. And then I had someone rage quit my Discord server because I wasn't active enough there while I was struggling so much with my 90-hour work week that I didn't even have time to text my mom back. The number of people who have acted like I owed them not only my constant regular responses, but my friendship and attention and my full, genuine, authentic self has been appalling. And then there were the upwards of 20 emails I've gotten full of people just trauma dumping at me about their lives and what they're going through. Not to mention the similar instances in the form of comments on YouTube, because they thought I could understand and help them. Those hurt the most, I think, because it's not like I don't care about what they're going through. It's not like I don't want to help or that their pain doesn't matter to me, or I don't wish I could be the supportive person that they're looking for. It's just that I don't even know these people and they're pouring their pain onto me like I can fix it, and I'm not qualified to try to help. I don't have the mental bandwidth to try to when it's all I can do to try to handle my own problems. And it's so much. It's a lot of pressure to put on some dumbass yelling about nothing on YouTube. My point in going over those experiences is that I quickly learned that extreme instances of parasocial relationships are nowhere near as rare as I thought they were, and that sometimes it can be genuinely painful and really overwhelming to try to distance yourself from them. It's also not as straightforward or simple as it seems like it should be. On the surface, it seems easy. Don't answer comments, don't answer messages you're uncomfortable with, separate your personal identity from your online persona, and interact with people only on a professional level, not a personal one. But not answering comments feels like I'm letting my community down by not connecting or engaging with them or maintaining an open dialogue. And how am I supposed to just ignore a message that makes me uncomfortable when it's some 11-year-old kid having a mental breakdown just looking for someone who can understand? And separating my personal identity from my online persona feels so much like I'm lying to you guys or being disingenuous, even when I know I'm not. But letting you guys see too much of my full self feels invasive and terrifying and uncomfortable. It's just all very straightforward in theory, but full of contradictions and problems in practice. And it's really just one big clusterfuck of confusion and conflict. I think that last example was the one that's caused me the most stress and inner conflict, honestly. I know that for all of the reasons I mentioned at the beginning of the video and more, I can't be the unfiltered, rough around the edges asshole that I know I really am in my content. I know that the healthy thing to do is just show you guys as much of who I am as I'm comfortable with and establish healthy boundaries between who I am as Celestia and who I am as Paige. But it's just so hard to actually implement that and feel good about it. It feels like I'm lying to you or letting you down by holding myself back and running my actual self through a 10-level filtration system of wholesome, ad-friendly, uncontroversial bullshit. Because I'm not wholesome or ad-friendly or uncontroversial. I'm not saying I'm a scumbag, but I identify a lot more with Shane Madej looking into the camera wearing a flowery shirt and saying, "And I'm a nihilist," than I do with most of the ways that I've been described by viewers. I think it really hit me when I got a commission recently from someone that opened with, "I know you're not the dark and nitty-gritty type, but..." And first of all, I mean no offense to this person. They actually seem unbelievably cool so far, and they're not even wrong. Nothing about my persona as Celestia would suggest otherwise. But shit, it just hit me so hard because I'm the biggest horror buff I know. I was watching Silence of the Lambs when I was 7. I spend every waking moment listening to true crime podcasts. I used to draw almost exclusively Guro before I had to censor it for the sake of making channel speed paints. I fall asleep to creepypasta. My comfort movies are slasher flicks. I, as Paige, am nothing but the dark and nitty-gritty type. And I don't think I ever realized before that message that that's an entire, huge part of my identity that is so important to me, and it is not even being vaguely represented through my content. And there are so many other parts of my identity that are just as hidden without me ever even realizing it, which again, that's a good thing. It's a good, healthy thing for me to keep significant parts of myself private for my own mental health and work-life balance, and that is how it should be. But it doesn't feel good sometimes when it hits me all at once how different the real me is from the me I'm able to show. There's also a lot of pressure that results from that, because when people tell me they look up to me or I've inspired them or anything along those lines, it feels like, number one, they would not look up to me if they knew how much of a dumb asshole I really was, and therefore I'm letting them down by default. And number two, if I ever make a mistake or stop making the content they enjoy or do something else wrong in their eyes, I'm now letting down someone or multiple someones that trusted me to be a person worthy of their admiration in even the tiniest of ways. And I know that's just something I personally need to work on, because I know I can't put that on myself and I have to learn to get past that anxiety and stress on my own and realize that I'll never be able to make everyone happy and therefore shouldn't expect myself to. But I guess I just didn't realize how much that side of parasocial relationships would end up impacting me. And it's at least worth mentioning here because it's something I hadn't thought about when my only perspective was that of a fan and not a creator. I don't know. Ultimately, at the end of the day, there are a lot of ways that parasocial relationships can affect everyone involved in them. And honestly, very few of them are good. I can't think of any particularly positive examples of them helping anyone. And for the most part, the more I've explored the topic, the more passionately I found myself imploring myself and others to try to consciously avoid them whenever possible. But that said, they're also a normal part of life, at least to some degree. When I say they're bad and unhealthy, I don't mean the people experiencing them are themselves bad and unhealthy. I remember sending a few of my favorite creators messages when I was like 13, 14, 15, about how much they helped me through horrible times and unsafe living situations and mental health struggles and trauma. And looking back at that now, I feel horrible about it. Because having some dumb kid's life story dumped onto them as if they're expected to know how to respond to it, or have an obligation to respond at all, must have been beyond uncomfortable. But from my perspective, it was harmless. I thought it would make them happy. And I'm not saying it's okay to make creators uncomfortable because you have good intention, but I am saying that a lot of the unhealthy and potentially harmful behaviors resulting from parasocial relationships are rarely malicious in nature, and my intention in making this video isn't to blame people struggling with them. Sometimes they are bad and unhealthy, yeah, but it doesn't make you a bad person to experience them. I just think it's important to try to force yourself to examine how you're experiencing them more closely, so that you can establish healthier relationships with content and those who make it instead. Or on the creator side, so that you can make sure you're doing your best not to enable or encourage those parasocial relationships from your audiences. It's a really, really difficult topic problematic in a lot of ways because it feels so personal to everyone involved. Everyone has a creator they look up to and care about and relate to, and that can be such a valuable thing, especially if you're struggling to feel understood or connected to other people in your life. And I don't mean to say that that's bad or should never be allowed. I just think it's so important to try to be aware whenever possible that while you're more than entitled to that perception of the creator you admire, it's also your responsibility to recognize that that is just your perception of them. It's not the real them. And having that perception can only really be healthy and okay if you're not blaming them for their real selves not matching it or expecting a personal relationship with them based on it. Because in healthy, monitored moderation, in my opinion, parasocial relationships can be a normal and even beneficial thing, but in obsessive excess, they can be undeniably and terrifyingly damaging and hurtful to everyone involved in them. At the end of the day, as much as I struggle with it, I'm happy that I can bring some of you joy and entertainment with Celestia, and I plan to continue to. And I'm gonna try to stop feeling so bad for keeping the Paige part of me to myself. She shines through when it matters, like when I have breakdowns about Denny's, or post bloopers, or ramble about my 4 new Tears of Themis boyfriends, and I think that's just the right amount. I don't think you guys can handle more. Not because I'm just that powerful, I'm just that intolerable. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. And big thank you again to Hoyoverse for sponsoring it and ruining my life in the best possible way with their game. I will never be the same. Finally, special thank you as always to channel members Cafe Soleil, Joseph Solomon, Unknown Code, Dolph, Lucian is Appa, and Abyss Reborn, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, This Is Totally My Name, Unity, Cora Fear, Jamisha Walker, Shirome Artiste, Alengshi, and Soul Crystal for their support, and I'll see you in my next one.